Hello, my name is Dr. Emily Leishman, and today I'm going to be talking about mathematical modeling and some ongoing applications in the equine sector. But first, it's best to define what is a model. A model is an equation or a set of equations that describe the behavior of a system. In animal science, this system is usually a biological system, like a whole animal. Scientists and engineers have been using models for decades to represent bits of the real world. Typically, these models, or bits of the real world, represent a simplified representation of the most essential components of a given system. And it's up to the modeler to determine what those essential components are, which depend on the purpose or the overall goal of the model. When these models are built, they're used to improve our understanding of how the system works, or to predict how the system will behave under different sets of conditions. There are many different types of models, but they can be broadly classified into the following groups. Models can be dynamic or static. Dynamic models follow a system over time, so there's a time or a longitudinal component, whereas static models are just looking at a single point in time. Models can also be mechanistic or empirical. Mechanistic models are based on the underlying biology or the biological relationships within a system, whereas empirical models are based solely on the relationships within the data. Lastly, models can be stochastic or deterministic. Stochastic models have a randomness or a variance to their predictions, and they're usually used when you want to predict the outcomes for a group of animals. Whereas deterministic models have a single prediction value, so for example, predicting the outcomes for a single animal. And although these categories are listed as or statements, that in reality the lines between them are blurred. A model of a given system can have elements that are deterministic, some elements that are stochastic, can also have a mix of empirical and mechanistic elements, all within the same model. So although these are listed as separate categories, it's really much more of a continuum in real life. So you might ask, why model in the first place? Why not just go out into the real world and observe the system yourself? Well, the average person or experiment can only monitor a limited number of variables at any one time. We're only human, and usually we're humans with limited resources or limited numbers of animals that we can access. Models allow us to follow many variables simultaneously and observe how these variables work and how they interact with each other, all in one place. And so in this way, models represent a powerful summation tool where we can take our body of knowledge about how a system works and synthesize it all in one place. To illustrate this further, we can pretend that we're interested in how one particular diet influences the growth of a horse. And so we decide to go searching in the literature and find some experiments that track this diet and its effects on horse growth. And to our luck, we find 4 experiments that use the exact same diet and look at the exact same outcome variables. But we look a little bit closer, and we realize that experiments 1 and experiments 2, they use one particular breed of horse. And experiment 3 and experiment 4, they use a different breed of horse. So now we have to consider if there are breed effects on how that diet influences growth. Does one breed grow faster than the other? Is one breed more muscular? Is one breed more fatty? That's fine, we can maybe wrap our heads around that. But then we look a little bit closer and we realize that experiments 1 and experiments 3 use male horses, and experiments 2 and experiments 4 use female horses. Now we have to consider a sex effect. Do male horses grow differently than female horses? And in addition to that, we have to think about how breed and sex interact with each other. Do males of one breed grow the same way as males of a different breed? So it's not only the variables themselves, it's also their interactions we have to think about. And just to add another layer of complexity, we can pretend that experiments 1, 2, and 3 are from Canada on Canadian horses under Canadian conditions, whereas experiment 4 is from the UK horses, UK conditions. And this adds even more complexity because between countries there can be differences in management styles, differences in feed ingredients, differences in the environment or the climate, all of which can influence how that diet affects growth. And so you can see, even with this very small example, how quickly it gets complicated and how difficult it might be to really understand, just from looking at individual experiments, how particular diets affect, for example, growth. And this is where models become really, really useful because of their ability to synthesize all of this information into one place. And in this way, models are used to turn information into knowledge by connecting the dots between all of these different studies, all of these different sources of variation, all of these different complexities, and allow us to observe the variables by themselves, but also how they interact. In animal science, models are used as a primary means to translate research and knowledge into practice, and they're used to solve practical problems and guide decision making. In animal systems, these models need to predict and manage animal performance, animal efficiency. They need to conduct performance and system optimization and do least cost formulations, while integrating complexities like management, health, genetics, the environment, and those sorts of things. And that's where models become really, really useful because of their ability to tackle all of these complex interactions all at once. What can a model do? Models can do lots of different things, and they're applied in many different ways in animal science and animal industries. Models can evaluate nutrition programs given current feed ingredient prices and give you a least cost formulation. Models can optimize diet formulations for a given objective. So for example, if you want to maximize your feed efficiency, or if you want to maintain body weight, if you want to improve athletic performance. Models can also optimize a nutrition program under compromising conditions. So for example, heat stress or disease. And models can also provide a diagnostic support tool to evaluate challenges in general. But ultimately, models synthesize our collective knowledge on quantitative nutrition in an animal system into a single platform that can be leveraged depending on the goals and needs of the user. And here's where I want to highlight mechanistic models, because mechanistic models are used very heavily in animal science for their decision-making capabilities, among others. And this is because mechanistic models are process-based. They seek to understand causation because they are built using the biological principles of that system. They contain that underlying biological knowledge for how that system works. And in technical terms, this means that they describe the system at level I using components and processes at level I-1 or even lower. To put this visually, I can show you the difference between an empirical model and a mechanistic model. So let's say, for example, the system that we want to model is growth or body weight gain in a whole horse. So we have the system that we're trying to model is at the whole animal level, level I. If we want to do this empirically, we could take another source of data at the whole animal level and do a linear relationship, for example, between feed intake and body weight gain. So we could plot feed intake, we could plot that against body weight gain, and do a linear relationship to empirically determine that system. However, mechanistic models work a little bit differently. In mechanistic models, you're dropping down several layers of complexity in order to predict the same outcome. So in a mechanistic model, we can still predict body weight gain or growth of that horse at the whole animal level, but we're going to do so using processes at levels lower. So we can still start with feed intake or horse eating food, but in a mechanistic model, we will track that food that's ingested and how that flows into digested nutrients, how those digested nutrients flow into metabolite pools like your amino acids, and how those metabolite pools flow into the body composition of the animal. So how do those metabolized amino acids contribute to body protein stores? And then how the body composition contributes to overall growth or body weight gain. So depending on changes in body protein and body fat, that horse will grow. And so you can see how this is much more reliant on an underlying biological knowledge of how this system works, because we need to know how do we track nutrients from feed intake all the way up to body weight gain on a much more finer grain compared to just an empirical model, which is simply looking at relationships between the data at that level I, or at that whole animal level. And because of this underlying biological knowledge that's sort of contained within mechanistic models, there's several key niches of where mechanistic models fall in animal science or animal industries. The first being in opportunity analysis and decision support in general. Models, specifically mechanistic models, can be used to identify performance limiting factors. They can be used to determine the optimal nutrient contents of the feed. They can evaluate management strategies to optimize performance, for example, athletic performance. They can examine strategies, for example, to reduce environmental waste into the environment. And importantly, they can forecast outcomes in scenarios not yet seen in practice. So this means that they're not necessarily reliant on having a specific experiment describe that scenario. You can manipulate the inputs to the model as you see fit and describe many different scenarios, for example, a particular breed in an environment that it's never been in. Models also find their niche in performance optimization. Mechanistic models are often linked to an optimizer, which is a coding algorithm that you can give a desired objective. So for example, if you want to minimize the cost of your feed, if you want to maintain growth, if you want to maximize athletic performance. And the optimizer will iterate through your model and come up with an optimal solution. So for example, an optimal diet formulation to achieve your given objective. And this is really where mechanistic models shine, because they're able to consider the environment and genetics all within the model. And so you can come up with an optimal solution, for example, for different breeds in different environments, and all of these different complexities that you can come up with solutions for. And lastly, mechanistic models really find a niche in understanding biological systems in general. They allow exploration of how a biological system works. They allow you to generate hypotheses. They allow you to test hypotheses. Even when the model works and even when the model fails, you identify where scientific knowledge is lacking, and that can be iterated with animal experimentation. And so modeling and animal experiments should not be considered as mutually exclusive or competitors. They can actually be used synergistically, where we take the body of knowledge gained from animal experimentation, we turn that into a model about how the system works, and then we see where the model shines and where the model fails. And those areas where the model fails, we can use to inform the next generation of animal experiments, which can be used to feed back into the model and improve it. And so really, models and animal experimentation can work hand in hand in this way. And lastly, mechanistic models can be really useful teaching tools. They can help students interact in a more intimate way with how the system works that they're learning about, as opposed to just reading about how the system works from a textbook or looking at a diagram. They can actually take that system and they can manipulate the inputs and see how it affects downstream processes, how it influences the output. And this is really a learning by doing method where students can really interact with what they're learning about and engage in ways that aren't offered by more traditional methods. And now I want to talk about some ongoing applications of mechanistic modeling in the equine sector. Specifically, this large-scale project, which is a collaboration between many different organizations and many different areas of expertise, with the main goal to develop a mechanistic digestion and metabolism model for horses. And this project really arose because equine diets can oversupply macronutrients and undersupply key micronutrients, and this can be metabolically taxing, having adverse health and well-being effects on the horse. Additionally, there can be adverse environmental impacts. If you're consistently overfeeding macronutrients, this can create increased wastes going into the environment. Another challenge is that consumers or owners face knowledge, cost, and supply barriers in implementing sound feeding plans. There are not a lot of models or mechanistic models out there that can provide the sort of information that is easy to understand for the equine sector. And so there's a need for a highly usable and accessible nutrition and metabolism model that enables end users to really put advanced knowledge into practice. And so we can build a model for horses to synthesize and analyze our cumulative biological knowledge on horse nutrition. We can increase our biological understanding of how these systems work, which will allow us to identify research and knowledge gaps to inform new experiments, generate new ideas. We can improve diet formulation and reduce the environmental footprint of the horse industry. The overarching research objective of this large-scale project is to develop an equine metabolism and digestion model using models developed in other species, published equine research, and targeted experimental work to fill in any knowledge gaps. The main problem is that there is a lack of mechanistic modeling for equines out there, especially models that are accessible to the entire sector. In this project, we're going to be beginning with the metabolism model. And the goal of this metabolism model is to develop a model that describes the post-absorptive nutrient dynamics in the mature horse. And eventually, this model will be integrated with all of the other aspects of the large-scale project. In the following slides, I will go through the analytical framework, or the flow of information, through the metabolism model. And in these diagrams, there are some common elements. There are rectangles, which represent the model pools. And these model pools are what the model is going to predict the quantity of over time. So for example, the quantity of body fat or the quantity of amino acids over time. And connecting these boxes together are arrows, and these arrows are known as fluxes. And these fluxes represent the rate of model processes that determine how the pool sizes change over time. So for example, the flow of amino acids into body protein is represented by an arrow. This is a simplified framework for how the metabolism model will work. The metabolism model begins with absorbed nutrients. So the horse eats food, that food is digested, and the nutrients are absorbed. And that gives us our starting point for the metabolism model. Eventually, we'll develop a mechanistic digestion model for the horse, and that will be used and integrated with the metabolism model to provide the inputs. And then the model will describe how these absorbed nutrients flow into the post-absorptive environment. And in the post-absorptive environment, we're including the major metabolite pools like acetyl-CoA, fatty acids, glucose, glycogen, and amino acids. And not only modeling how these absorbed nutrients contribute to these pools, but also the interactions within the metabolite pools, for example, representing processes like gluconeogenesis or glycogenolysis. These post-absorptive metabolites will then contribute to body composition pools. So for example, body ash, body fat, muscle protein, hide protein, visceral protein, all of which will contribute to the overall growth of the animal. Put visually, this is what the model can look like. The model begins with those digested nutrients, which will contribute to the major outputs of the model, or the major things that we can learn from the model, which is tracking body growth and maintenance, body composition, energy and metabolism, amino acid balance, as well as heat production. Eventually, we're going to put all of these pieces together. The metabolism model is just one part of the puzzle. We're also going to be developing the equine digestion model, integrating these two models together, performing feedstuff characterization, adding an optimization routine, including things like exercise as well as gestation and lactation. But a large focus of this project is also on the knowledge translation and transfer and the getting research into practice. We really want to make sure that the end product of this overall project is something that is useful and is needed for the goals of the equine sector. And within this project, we have a really large team with a large and diverse set of experience. We have people with expertise in animal systems modeling. We have experts in equine physiology and nutrition. We have experts on in vitro feed characterization, as well as computer science and engineering. But really what we want to emphasize here is a partnered approach with the equine industry stakeholders and inform stakeholders throughout the duration of the project, so we can make sure that what we're producing is in line with expectations and needs of the sector. At the end of the project, we hope to deliver a digital decision-making tool for the equine sector that can perform things like ration balancing, performance optimization, minimizing the environmental footprint, as well as reducing the risk of disease. And on the academic and research side, we hope to produce a digital tool for researchers that contains our cumulative biological knowledge on nutrient dynamics in horses, which gives us a tool to explore hypotheses to identify research and knowledge gaps while training the next generation of highly qualified personnel ready to enter the equine sector with tools in both nutrition as well as digital systems. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our ongoing research. We look forward to sharing the results and progress of this research project with all stakeholders in the equine industry. If you have any questions about the research, please don't hesitate to reach out and we'll be happy to answer them.